Black boy spent his last $20 saving a Hell's Angel. 100 bikers brought a gift that changed his life. In the heart of Cleveland's East Side, a neighborhood stitched together with rusted fences and fading murals, 14-year-old Elijah Carter had already learned what sacrifice meant. While other kids his age were arguing over sneakers or video games, Elijah spent his afternoons washing cars and carrying groceries to help his mother keep the lights on. His small hands, blistered from work, told the story of a boy growing up too soon in a world that rarely gave second chances. His mother, Maria Carter, worked endless double shifts as a nurse at St. Francis Hospital, a place that smelled like disinfectant and quiet exhaustion. She was the kind of woman who smiled even when her eyes looked tired, who came home at dawn with aching feet but still found time to tuck her daughter in with a kiss. Lena, Elijah's 8-year-old sister, was fragile in body but strong in spirit. She had severe asthma, the kind that could turn a single missed inhaler dose into a life-or-death moment. And then there was the absence that shaped them all, David Carter, Elijah's father, a paramedic who had died years earlier while saving a stranger trapped in a burning car. His photo still hung by the door, smiling, proud, wearing the same uniform that had cost him his life. To Elijah, that picture wasn't just a memory. It was a standard to live up to. Every time he left the apartment, his father's voice seemed to echo in his head. Be the one who helps, no matter who they are. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. Most days, Elijah kept to himself. The neighborhood wasn't kind to dreamers. The streets were full of people who had given up, waiting for someone else to fix what was broken. But Elijah didn't have that luxury. Between school, caring for Lena, and helping his mother stretch every dollar, he'd learned early that doing good didn't always mean getting rewarded. Sometimes it just meant surviving with your integrity intact. That humid afternoon in late July felt like any other, the kind of day where the air stuck to your skin and the sound of sirens faded into background noise. Elijah had just finished washing Mr. Thomas's old Buick for $10 when his phone buzzed. A text from his mom. Lena's almost out of medicine. Please grab her inhaler before the pharmacy closes. He checked his wallet, $20, all he had left from a week's worth of hustling. It would be enough for the inhaler, perhaps a snack for Lena if he stretched it out. He didn't hesitate. He never did. The small pharmacy across from their apartment complex was run by a man who knew everyone by name. Elijah had been there dozens of times. But that day, as he stood in line, the air felt heavier. A storm was brewing outside, gray clouds pressing low, wind whipping dust down the empty street. He didn't think much of it. He just paid for the inhaler, tucked the small bag under his arm, and stepped out into the parking lot. That's when he saw him. A large man stumbled near the curb, tattoos covering his arms, a leather vest stretched tight across his chest, and a heavy chain hanging from his neck. His skin was pale, his lips trembling, as if every breath was a battle. People noticed but kept their distance. No one wanted to get involved. The man's vest carried the unmistakable insignia, a black vulture spreading its wings, Steel Vulture's Motorcycle Club, a name whispered with both fear and resentment in that part of town. Someone shouted from behind Elijah, "Don't touch him, kid! Those bikers are trouble." The words sliced through the air, full of warning and prejudice. But Elijah didn't move away. Something inside him, that same stubborn spark that had kept his family alive, wouldn't let him walk past. He watched the man collapse onto the pavement, gasping for breath. There was panic around him, but no one stepped forward. For a split second, Elijah froze, torn between fear and instinct. Then his mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Help anyone who needs it. Don't ever ask who they are." He dropped the pharmacy bag and ran toward the fallen biker. Kneeling beside him, Elijah could smell the faint sting of alcohol, the heat rising off the asphalt, and something else, desperation. The man's trembling hand fumbled at his pocket, whispering a word Elijah barely caught, medicine. But when Elijah grabbed the bottle, it was empty. Empty. The boy looked toward the pharmacy door, heart pounding. He didn't think twice. He sprinted back inside, shouting for help, his voice cracking with urgency. He needs aspirin. Please. The clerk shook his head immediately. We don't sell medication to minors, he said flatly. The words hit Elijah like a wall, cold, bureaucratic, final. He looked down at the $20 bill in his hand, Lena's inhaler money. He didn't even blink. Then sell it to me as candy. Keep the change. The clerk hesitated but rang it up. Elijah didn't wait for a receipt. He grabbed the bottle and ran back outside. Kneeling again beside the biker, he forced a pill between the man's trembling lips, held his head up, and whispered, "You're gonna be okay, sir. Just breathe." The sirens arrived minutes later, blue and red lights flashing across the cracked pavement. Paramedics rushed in, pushing Elijah aside. One of them glanced down at him and said quietly, "Kid, you probably just saved this man's life." But as the ambulance pulled away, the weight of what he'd done settled over him. The $20 was gone. The inhaler was still sitting on the hot sidewalk, useless now. His sister was at home, waiting, struggling to breathe. Elijah picked up the bag with shaking hands and whispered, "Please let her be okay." He started running through the heat, through the fear, through the doubt that maybe, for once, doing the right thing might cost him everything. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Elijah's feet hit the cracked sidewalk over and over as he sprinted home through the muggy Cleveland air. His lungs burned, his heart hammered, and every block seemed longer than the last. By the time he burst through the apartment door, his shirt clung to his back with sweat and panic. The sound that greeted him stopped him cold. Lena's gasping. Each breath came sharp and shallow, the wheezing echoing through the small living room like a ticking clock counting down. Maria was already kneeling beside her, trying to keep her calm, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her strength. "Elijah, where's her medicine?" The words cut through him. He looked down at the empty bag in his hand, then back at his mother's trembling face. His voice broke when he spoke. I used the money, Mom. Someone collapsed outside. I had to help." For a moment, Maria just stared at him. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Then, slowly, she reached out, pulled him close, and whispered, "You did the right thing." But right didn't mean easy. The next hour was chaos. Maria grabbed her keys, wrapped Lena in a blanket, and they sped through the rain-slick streets toward St. Francis Hospital. The building loomed like a cold monument, its fluorescent lights flickering through the storm. Inside, the sterile air felt suffocating. At the reception desk, Maria explained in a rush what had happened. The head nurse, Janet Miller, looked up slowly, thin lips pressed into a line, eyes sharp with quiet disdain. She had seen Maria before, countless times, always rushing in from her double shifts, always asking for help. "You know the rules, Mrs. Carter," Janet said, her tone icy. "We can't dispense hospital supplies without authorization." "Please," Maria begged, voice trembling. "She's my daughter. I work here. I'll pay for it tomorrow. She just needs her inhaler." Janet folded her arms. "You people always have an excuse. Always someone else's fault." Elijah stood there, frozen, watching his mother crumble under the weight of those words. "You people." He'd heard it before, in the hallways at the store, whispered under breath when they walked by. But hearing it here, in a hospital where his mother gave her life caring for others, hit different. It burned. Before Maria could respond, a voice came from behind the desk. "I'll take care of it." It was Dr. Nathan Harris, a senior physician, stepping forward. His expression was stern but kind. He took Lena from Maria's arms and guided her to an exam room. Within minutes, the familiar hiss of a nebulizer filled the air. Relief washed over Maria as Lena's breathing began to steady. Elijah stood near the door, fists clenched. Janet's glare burned into his back. When Dr. Harris returned, Elijah turned toward her and said quietly, "Do you want to see the video of me saving someone's life today? Or do you only see what you want to see?" Janet didn't answer. She just turned away, pretending to check a chart. But her silence said everything. That night, back in their apartment, the rain hadn't stopped. The steady rhythm against the windows was almost like a heartbeat. Maria sat beside Elijah at the kitchen table, her face lit by the dull yellow bulb overhead. "There's something you don't know," she said softly. "About your father." Elijah looked up. "Years ago," she continued, "he saved a man from an overdose downtown. Everyone told him not to, said it was a waste of time, that the man was just another lost cause. But your father didn't listen. He said kindness travels in circles." Elijah frowned. "Did it ever come back to him?" Maria smiled sadly. "Maybe it hasn't yet." Just then, the phone rang. The sharp sound sliced through the silence. Maria hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly. "This is Logan Price. I'm a friend of Vince Dalton. He wants to meet the boy who saved his life." Elijah froze. The biker? He hadn't even known the man's name. By morning, the whole street knew something was happening. The roar came first, deep, thunderous, growing louder with every second. Then came the sight of them. 10 black motorcycles, lined up like armored soldiers outside the Carter's apartment. The neighborhood fell silent. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. Maria stepped outside first, clutching Lena's hand. Elijah followed, heart pounding. One of the men removed his helmet and smiled warmly. "You must be Elijah," he said. "I'm Logan. Vince asked us to come." Behind him, another man stepped forward, bandaged but standing tall. The same biker Elijah had saved. But now he wasn't just a biker. His presence carried weight, authority, and something else, gratitude. "Elijah," Logan said, his voice steady, "you didn't just save a man. You saved Robert Vince Dalton, owner of Dalton Construction Group. The man helping rebuild half this neighborhood." Gasps rippled through the crowd gathering outside. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Elijah just stared, stunned. Logan's tone softened. 15 years ago, Vince overdosed in an alley. Paramedics saved his life. His name was David Carter. The world tilted for a moment. Maria's knees buckled, and Elijah felt the air rush out of his lungs. His father, the man who had saved Vince all those years ago. But before anyone could process what that meant, the sound of a camera shutter snapped through the air. A local reporter had shown up, followed by more bikers, dozens of them, their jackets gleaming under the morning sun. The story was spreading fast. The boy who saved a biker had become the boy who saved a millionaire. News vans started circling. Strangers appeared, taking pictures, asking questions. But beneath the noise, another storm was brewing. The kind that couldn't be seen on camera. Because at St. Francis Hospital, Janet Miller was seething. She had watched the morning news, seen Elijah's face, and felt her chest tighten with a different kind of anger, the kind born from pride and prejudice. That afternoon, as reporters flooded the hospital lobby, 30 bikers rolled in, their engines echoing off the white tile floors. Vince, still pale but resolute, stood at the front. Every conversation stopped. Cameras turned. Nurses froze. The air felt electric, thick with tension, ready to snap. No one knew what would happen next. But everyone knew one thing. The boy who had once been invisible was now impossible to ignore. The hospital lobby had never seen anything like it. The low rumble of 30 motorcycles outside vibrated through the floors, shaking picture frames and hearts alike. Patients peeked from behind curtains. Nurses froze mid-step. Even the doctors stood silent, unsure if the chaos was about to erupt into violence. or something else entirely. At the center of it all stood Vince Dalton, the man Elijah had saved. He wasn't in his biker vest this time. He wore a simple black coat, still pale from recovery but radiating the kind of presence that silenced a room. Behind him, the steel vultures filled the hallway, tattooed, broad-shouldered, their jackets gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Maria held Elijah's arm tightly as they entered the lobby, her breath trembling. People stepped aside, whispering. Some recognized her from the nursing floor. Others had seen her son's story on the morning news. The cameras were already rolling. Reporters had gathered like vultures, sensing a scene that would go viral before the hour was over. Janet Miller stood at the reception desk, her usual composure slipping. Her face tightened when she saw Maria approach, and even tighter when Vince turned his gaze toward her. He stopped just a few feet away. The air felt heavy enough to crush silence itself. When Vince finally spoke, his voice was steady but cold. "We came to thank the woman who refused to help an 8-year-old girl breathe." Gasps rippled across the room. Maria's hand trembled. Elijah's heart raced. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Vince took a step closer, locking eyes with Janet. "Maybe now," he continued, "you'll understand what mercy means." Janet's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Every eye in the lobby was on her, waiting for an explanation that would never come. The woman who had once wielded power over others now stood exposed, stripped of authority, her cruelty laid bare before the world. Behind Vince, Logan unfolded a letter and handed it to a hospital administrator. "Formal complaint," he said simply. "Signed by the Dalton Foundation, the Steel Vultures Charity Division, and 27 witnesses." The administrator's face went pale. Within minutes, murmurs spread. The hospital director, Dr. Patterson, arrived in person, trying to calm the tension. But the decision came swiftly. Janet Miller was suspended pending investigation. Elijah watched as security escorted her out through the same sliding doors she once guarded like a gatekeeper. She didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone. The crowd parted in silence. Cameras followed her every step. But the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like justice that had taken too long to arrive. Vince turned to Elijah and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Your father once saved me," he said softly, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Today, his son returned that favor. You reminded this city what humanity looks like." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling like a wave. Maria's tears streamed freely as she held Lena close. Elijah tried to smile, but inside, his chest ached with something deeper, relief mixed with disbelief, like waking up from a nightmare he didn't know he was in. By evening, the story had spread beyond Cleveland. News stations across the country picked it up. "Boy who saved a millionaire" trended on social media. Comment sections flooded with praise, anger, and reflection. Donations poured in for the Carters, groceries, medical aid, and scholarship offers. But not everyone was celebrating. Days later, new headlines appeared, screenshots of Janet Miller's old posts. Racist jokes, mocking patients, sneering at families like the Carters. The internet didn't forgive her silence this time. Every cruel word she'd hidden came back to haunt her. The same crowd that had once feared her now condemned her. She lost her job, her nursing license, her fiancé, everything. Elijah didn't gloat. He couldn't, because while the world was tearing her apart, he was still trying to make sense of the kindness and cruelty that had collided in his life within the same week. He spent nights sitting by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. Sometimes he thought about his father, about how a single act of compassion had come full circle in ways none of them could have predicted. A few weeks later, Vince and Logan visited again. This time, there were no cameras, just quiet gratitude. They brought groceries, new clothes, a year's supply of Lena's medicine, and something Elijah hadn't expected: a $60,000 scholarship fund in his name. Vince's words lingered as he spoke. "Your father saved my life. Now you've saved his legacy. That night, Elijah walked past the photo of his father again. But this time, he didn't just see a uniformed man smiling from a frame. He saw a bridge between two worlds, a man who believed in people when the world told him not to. Months passed, and life began to settle. But one afternoon, as Elijah walked home from school, he noticed something new being built on an empty lot. Workers hammered steel beams into place. A large banner flapped in the wind. The David Carter Community Center, a place for hope. He stopped, speechless. Vince was there, overseeing construction. He waved Elijah over, smiling. "This is just the beginning," he said. For the first time in a long while, Elijah felt the weight in his chest lift. His father's legacy was alive, not just in name, but in every person who would walk through those doors someday, looking for a chance, a second life, or just a reason to believe that kindness still mattered. But stories like these never stay still. They ripple. Because somewhere on the outskirts of Cleveland, in a dimly lit veterinary clinic, Janet Miller scrubbed animal cages in silence. Her once polished hands were raw, her reflection in the metal bars unrecognizable. And every time she wiped away dirt, she remembered the boy she'd dismissed, the mother she'd humiliated, and the truth that had shattered her world. The storm that began with a $20 bill had swept through every life it touched, leaving behind one unshakable truth, that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can expose the deepest roots of prejudice. And as Elijah looked out over the city one final time, watching the last light fade beyond the rooftops, a single thought echoed through his heart. What if kindness really is the loudest form of justice? The months that followed were quieter but heavier, too. News trucks left. Reporters stopped calling. And for the first time in years, the Carter home wasn't filled with worry, only the distant hum of construction coming from the corner lot where a new story was being built. A story that began in pain but was ending in purpose. The David Carter Community Center opened on a mild spring morning. The crowd wasn't huge, no celebrity cameras this time, but the faces that showed up told a deeper story. There were children from Elijah's school, neighbors who used to cross the street instead of saying hello, nurses, teachers, construction workers. And right there in the front row sat Vince Dalton, his weathered hands folded, eyes glassy with something more than pride. Maria stood at the podium, her voice trembling at first but steadying as she spoke. My husband believed that kindness doesn't need permission. He believed that doing the right thing is never about who's watching, but who's hurting. Her words drifted across the crowd like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Elijah stood beside her, clutching Lena's hand, watching his mother transform years of quiet endurance into something powerful, something healing. Inside, the walls of the center were painted bright and warm. The main hall bore a mural of David Carter, smiling, hand extended toward two children of different races helping each other climb a hill. Below it, a plaque read, "Built in memory of a man who saw people, not color." It became more than a building. It became a refuge, free tutoring, meal programs, support for single parents. And every week, Elijah volunteered there, helping younger kids with homework, teaching them what his father once taught him. That compassion doesn't weaken you. It makes you unbreakable. But healing didn't happen overnight. Racism doesn't evaporate with one act of justice or one headline. The world outside the community center still had walls. Some visible, some invisible. Elijah saw it every time a teacher mistook him for another black student. Every time he heard someone call his neighborhood the bad part of town. Every time people praised his intelligence, it was like it was a surprise. He started speaking out, first at school assemblies, then at local events. His voice shook the first few times, but his message didn't. He told his story, not for sympathy, but for understanding. People think racism is just words, he said once, standing before a gym full of students. But it's also the quiet things. The way doors close before you even knock. The way kindness is questioned when it comes from someone who looks like me. Those words spread farther than he expected. Clips of his talks began circulating online. The same internet that had once broadcast his pain now amplified his truth. One comment stood out beneath one of his videos. "I never realized I was part of the silence until you made me listen." That was the moment Elijah understood what his father's legacy truly meant. It wasn't just about saving lives, it was about changing them. Meanwhile, the hospital that once turned its back on Maria introduced a new policy requiring bias and empathy training for all staff. A small step, yes, but steps matter. Change never arrives all at once. It comes in ripples, spreading from one brave voice to another. Even Janet Miller's downfall became part of the conversation. Some people celebrated her punishment. Others called it excessive. But the truth lingered somewhere in between. Racism doesn't end with revenge. It ends when awareness replaces ignorance, when accountability opens the door to change. And maybe, somewhere deep down, even Janet understood that. By the time Elijah graduated high school, the Carter story had faded from national memory, but not from local hearts. The community center became a cornerstone of hope. People who once divided themselves by class or color now stood side by side, repainting walls, serving food, and mentoring children. Vince visited often. He never came empty-handed. Sometimes with donations, sometimes with advice, but always with a quiet humility that said, "I remember who saved me." One summer evening, Elijah sat alone in the courtyard behind the center. The sunset burned gold over the rooftops. He thought about everything. His father's sacrifice, his mother's courage, the injustice that nearly broke them, and the unexpected kindness that saved them. He realized something profound. The fight against racism isn't just about laws or protests. It's about everyday choices. The choice to listen before judging, to stand up when silence feels safer, to see people as human before anything else. He looked up at the mural again, his father's hand reaching out eternally, and whispered, "I get it now, Dad. You didn't just save him. You saved us." The screen fades to black, and then the narrator's voice rises. Not loud, but resolute. Racism doesn't always scream. It whispers. It hides behind smiles, policies, and good intentions. But it also dies the same way it was built, one decision at a time, one act of courage, one moment of compassion. Elijah's story isn't rare. It's a mirror, showing us what happens when we stop seeing color as a threat and start seeing humanity as a responsibility. So maybe the real question isn't how the world became so divided. It's how many chances we'll waste before realizing we have the power to heal it. Because justice doesn't live in the courtroom. It lives in how we treat each other when no one's filming. What did you think of Elijah's story? Did his courage and kindness move you the way they did us? Sometimes one small act can change a life or even an entire community. If the story made you feel something, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button to help more people see it. And subscribe so you never miss powerful stories that reveal the truth about humanity, compassion, and change. Your support helps us keep sharing voices that deserve to be heard. Together, let's keep the message alive.